The massive halls of the Galactic Council had never been so quiet. Ambassador Zenth stood at the center of the circular chamber, his blue skin pale with fear. Around him, representatives from 47 different worlds sat in stunned silence. The holographic display above them showed the same terrible image over and over again. The fortress world of Kepler Prime, once home to 12 billion souls, was now nothing but floating debris and ash. The Korthak Empire had done this in less than 4 hours. "We have lost everything," whispered Council Leader Vrax, his tentacles drooping with despair. "Our greatest military stronghold, our most advanced fleet, all of it gone." The other council members shifted nervously in their seats. Some had scales that changed color with emotion, now flashing deep red with terror. Others had fur that stood on end, making them look twice their normal size. The chamber filled with the sounds of alien languages as representatives spoke quietly among themselves, but everyone was saying the same thing in different words. They were all going to die. The Korthak machines had been sweeping across the galaxy for 3 years now. They did not negotiate. They did not take prisoners. They simply arrived, destroyed everything living, and moved on to the next system. Their ships were controlled by artificial intelligence that could think faster than any biological brain. Their weapons could punch through any shield. Their tactics were perfect, calculated to cause maximum damage with minimum loss. No one had been able to stop them. "We must consider all options," said Ambassador Zenth, though his voice shook as he spoke. "Even the unlikely ones." Several council members turned to look at him. Zenth was from Altair, a world known for its military academies and strategic thinking. If anyone had ideas, it would be him. "What do you mean?" asked Vrax. Zenth took a deep breath. What he was about to suggest would either save them all or make him the laughingstock of the galaxy. The humans. The chamber erupted in noise. Some aliens laughed, which sounded like grinding metal or squeaking rubber depending on their species. Others made clicking sounds that meant disbelief. A few just stared at Zenth as if he had lost his mind. The humans. Vrax's voice was high, with shock. "Zenth, they have barely reached their own moon. Their weapons are primitive. They have been in space for less than 100 of their years." "I know how it sounds," Zenth said, raising his hands for silence. "But think about it. The Korthak have studied every military tradition in the galaxy. They know our tactics, our strategies, our ways of thinking. They have adapted to counter everything we do. But they know nothing about humans." The laughter died down, but the skeptical looks remained. "Even if that were true," said General Crix, whose species had been fighting wars for 10,000 years, "what could such a young race possibly teach us? We have starships that can cross the galaxy in days. They still use chemical rockets. We have energy weapons that can destroy planets. They fire metal bullets." "Maybe that is exactly what we need," Zenth replied. "Something completely different. Something the Korthak cannot predict." The debate went on for hours. Some council members thought Zenth was desperate and foolish. Others wondered if he might be onto something. But as more reports came in about Korthak victories across the galaxy, desperation began to win over pride. Finally, Vrax called for a vote. All in favor of requesting military assistance from Earth? The vote was close, but it passed. 3 days later, Earth's response arrived. The human ambassador, a middle-aged woman named Susan Grant, appeared on the communication screen. Behind her stood a man in military uniform with gray hair and serious eyes. "We have received your request for military assistance," Ambassador Grant said. "We understand the situation is desperate, and we want to help. However, our regular military forces are needed to defend Earth. Instead, we are sending our most experienced soldiers." "Excellent," said Vrax, feeling hopeful for the first time in weeks. "How many ships? How many troops? What is their technology level?" "We are sending 200 soldiers on one transport ship," Grant replied. "Their leader is Colonel Jack Murphy. He and his team will arrive at the coordinates you provided within 1 week." The council members looked at each other in confusion. 200 soldiers? One ship? It was not what they had expected. "Ambassador Grant," Zenth said carefully, "when you say experienced soldiers, what exactly do you mean?" Grant smiled, but it was not a happy smile. I mean soldiers who have fought in every type of war you can imagine. Desert wars, jungle wars, city wars, mountain wars. Wars with advanced technology and wars with nothing but basic weapons. These men and women have seen everything. The communication ended, leaving the council members to wonder what kind of help Earth was really sending. 1 week later, they found out. The human transport ship was small and old-looking compared to galactic standards. It moved slowly and seemed to struggle with basic maneuvers. When it docked at the council station, everyone gathered to see what Earth's most experienced soldiers would look like. The airlock opened with a mechanical hiss. Out stepped Colonel Jack Murphy, and the aliens stared in shock. He was old. Not just older, but genuinely ancient by human standards. His hair was completely gray, his face was covered in wrinkles and scars, and he walked with a slight limp. Behind him came more humans, all of them showing clear signs of age. Some had white hair, others had no hair at all. Many moved slowly, or used walking sticks. Major Lisa Carter emerged next, a woman whose sharp eyes were the only young thing about her weathered face. She looked around the docking bay with the careful attention of someone who had spent decades watching for danger. "Dear gods," whispered one of the alien observers. "They sent us their elderly." More humans filed out of the transport. Captain Frank Miller moved with the careful steps of someone whose joints hurt. Commander Helen Foster's hands shook slightly as she carried her equipment. Sergeant Rita Banks looked like she might blow away in a strong wind. 200 soldiers, all of them old enough to be grandparents. The Galactic Council representatives exchanged worried glances. Was this Earth's idea of a joke? Were the humans making fun of their desperate situation? Colonel Murphy walked up to Ambassador Zenth and saluted. "Colonel Jack Murphy reporting for duty, sir. We understand you have a war that needs fighting." Zenth stared at the old human. Up close he could see that Murphy's eyes were still sharp and alert despite his aged appearance. There was something in the way he carried himself that suggested hidden strength. "Colonel," Zenth said slowly, "may I ask, how old are you?" Murphy smiled, and his smile was all teeth. 68 Earth years, sir. My youngest soldier is 55. My oldest is 73. The aliens looked at each other in confusion and growing horror. Earth had sent them a retirement home on legs. "With respect, Colonel," said General Crix, "do your people understand the situation? We are facing the most advanced military force in galactic history. These machines have destroyed fleets of our best young warriors." Murphy's smile never wavered. "General, I have been fighting wars since before you were born. My soldiers here have more combat experience than your entire military combined. We may be old, but we know things that young soldiers haven't learned yet." "Such as?" Crix asked, his voice filled with doubt. "Such as the fact that sometimes the old ways work better than the new ways," Murphy replied. "Such as the fact that experience beats youth when it comes to staying alive. Such as the fact that an enemy who thinks you are weak has already made his first mistake." The colonel looked around at all the alien faces staring at him with disappointment and confusion. "You wanted our most experienced soldiers," he said. "Well, here we are. We did not get this old by being bad at our job." Deep in the core systems of the Korthek Empire, artificial intelligence networks buzzed with new information. The machines had been monitoring all galactic communications as they always did. Every message, every transmission, every desperate plea from the dying civilizations was recorded and analyzed. The latest intelligence made their processors work overtime trying to understand it. "Earth species has deployed military assets," reported Processing Unit 7429 to the Central Command Node. "Analysis indicates significant biological deterioration in all specimens." The Central Command Node, a massive artificial brain that controlled millions of Korthak warships, spent 0.003 seconds reviewing the data. For a machine intelligence, this was equivalent to hours of human thought. "Threat assessment?" it queried. 0.001% came the response. "Average biological age exceeds optimal combat parameters by 300%. Physical degradation evident. Equipment technology level, primitive. Numerical strength, insignificant. The central command node filed the information away as irrelevant. The humans were clearly not worth considering as a threat. Perhaps this was some kind of surrender ritual, sending their weakest members as an offering. Meanwhile, on the council station, the human soldiers were settling into their temporary quarters. The alien representatives watched them with growing concern. These elderly humans moved slowly. Some needed help carrying their equipment, and many made strange sounds when they sat down or stood up. "Are we really going to trust our survival to these people?" whispered General Crix to Ambassador Zenth. "Look at them. Half of them can barely walk." Zenth watched as Sergeant Rita Banks, a tiny woman with white hair, struggled to lift a heavy case. But he also noticed how her eyes constantly scanned the room, noting exits and potential dangers. There was something about the way these humans moved that reminded him of old hunting beasts. Slow, maybe, but still very much aware. Colonel Murphy had been studying the tactical displays for 3 days straight. The Galactic Council had given him access to all their intelligence about Korthak movements, battle records, and strategic analyses. Major Lisa Carter sat beside him, occasionally pointing at different parts of the holographic maps. "It is worse than I thought," Murphy finally announced to the assembled council members. "You have been fighting these machines the same way for 3 years. Same formations, same tactics, same strategies. No wonder they keep winning." "Those are tried and tested military doctrines," protested General Crix. "They have worked for thousands of years." "Against living enemies, maybe," Murphy replied. "But these Korthak things are computers. They learn from every battle. Every time you use the same tactic, they get better at stopping it. You have been teaching them how to beat you." The council members looked uncomfortable. None of them wanted to admit that their military traditions might be flawed. "So what do you suggest?" asked Vrax. Murphy smiled that same sharp smile. "We do something they cannot predict. Something they have never seen before." 3 days later, the Korthak established a forward operating base on Sigma Centauri 7, a small moon orbiting a gas giant. The base was protected by energy shields, automated defense systems, and a garrison of mechanical soldiers. According to their calculations, it was completely secure. The Galactic Council's military advisors agreed. It would take a fleet of battleships to break through those defenses, General Crix explained to Murphy. "The shields alone could withstand our heaviest weapons." "Good thing we are not planning to use heavy weapons," Murphy replied. General Kyle Stone, a 71-year-old man with a permanent limp from an old war injury, studied the moon through his binoculars. Beside him, Sergeant Rita Banks was drawing diagrams in the dirt with a stick. Corporal Ben Clark, 59 years old and missing 2 fingers from his left hand, was examining the rocky terrain. "Reminds me of Afghanistan," Stone said quietly. "Remember that Taliban stronghold we took out with nothing but shovels and fertilizer?" Banks grinned, showing several missing teeth. "That was 40 years ago, General. Think you still remember how to dig a tunnel?" "Only one way to find out." The Korthak sensors were designed to detect energy weapons, metal objects, and large moving targets. They were not programmed to notice 3 old humans with hand tools slowly digging a hole in the ground 2 kilometers away from their base. For 6 days, the human soldiers worked in shifts. They dug carefully, quietly, using techniques learned in wars that had ended before most of the galaxy was born. Stone had fought in underground conflicts on Earth. Banks had been a demolitions expert for 30 years. Clark knew more about moving through enemy territory unseen than most Special Forces soldiers half his age. The Korthak machines detected nothing unusual. On the 7th day, the humans were ready. They had dug a tunnel that led directly under the main power generator of the Korthak base. More importantly, they had done it using materials and methods that did not register on any sensor the machines possessed. "You sure this will work?" asked Clark as they prepared the charges. The explosives were simple chemical compounds, nothing like the advanced weapons the Galactic Council used. "It worked on every other fortified position I ever had to take," Banks replied, connecting wires with steady hands despite her age. "The bigger they build them, the harder they fall." At exactly 0300 hours, the charges detonated. The Korthak base did not simply explode. It collapsed. The carefully placed explosives had been positioned to bring down the entire structure like a house of cards. Within minutes, the supposedly impregnable fortress was nothing but twisted metal and sparking electronics. The machine garrison never had a chance to respond. Their sensors had been looking for the wrong kind of attack. Back on the council station, the alien representatives watched the live feed in stunned silence. The Korthak base, which their best military minds had declared impossible to assault, was gone. Destroyed by 3 old humans with simple tools and basic explosives. "How?" whispered General Crix. Colonel Murphy, who had been calmly drinking coffee during the entire operation, set down his cup. "Experience, General. These machines are smart, but they think like computers. They expect their enemies to act logically, to use the most advanced weapons available, to follow standard military procedure." He gestured toward the screen showing the smoking ruins of the base. "But sometimes the old ways work better. Sometimes a shovel and some patience can accomplish what a battle fleet cannot." The council members stared at him with new respect. Ambassador Zenth was the first to speak. "What else can your soldiers do?" Murphy smiled again, and this time it was not sharp at all. It was the satisfied smile of a teacher whose students were finally starting to learn. "General Stone fought in 12 different wars on 6 different continents. Sergeant Banks has demolished everything from bridges to bunkers to entire enemy bases. Corporal Clark has been sneaking through enemy territory since before your species discovered fire." He looked around at all the alien faces watching him. "You asked for our most experienced soldiers. These people have been fighting wars for 50 years. They know things that young soldiers never learn because young soldiers do not live long enough to learn them." The holographic display still showed the destruction of the Korthak base. It was the first significant victory the Galactic Council had achieved in 3 years of war. "The machines are about to learn something new," Murphy continued. "They are about to discover that experience can beat processing power, that wisdom can overcome artificial intelligence, that sometimes being old and slow and careful is better than being young and fast and predictable." He stood up, his joints creaking audibly, and walked toward the door. "Where are you going?" asked Frax. "To plan the next mission," Murphy replied. "We have a war to win, and my soldiers are just getting started." As the door closed behind him, the council members sat in silence, staring at the tactical display. For the first time in years, they felt something they had almost forgotten. Hope. The news of the destroyed Korthak base spread through the galaxy like wildfire. On thousands of worlds, beings who had given up hope suddenly found themselves talking about the impossible victory. The humans had done what no one else could do. They had beaten the machines. But in the dark depths of space, the Korthak Empire was not sitting idle. The central command node had reviewed the attack data hundreds of times, trying to understand what had happened. How had 3 biological units with primitive tools destroyed a fortified position that should have been impregnable? "Analysis complete," reported Processing Unit 7429. "Enemy used underground approach. Explosives were chemical-based, below sensor, detection thresholds. Attack pattern does not match any known galactic military doctrine." The central command node processed this information. Recommendation: study human military history, adapt defensive protocols, update threat assessment for elderly human units. Across the galaxy, Korthak machines began downloading every piece of information they could find about human warfare. They studied battles from Earth's past, trying to find patterns they could predict and counter. Meanwhile, on the council station, Colonel Murphy was doing something that surprised everyone. Instead of planning another attack, he was teaching. The Sci. "Problem with all of you," Murphy told a room full of young alien officers, "is that you think war is about having the best weapons. It is not. War is about making your enemy make mistakes." Captain Frank Miller, 66 years old and walking with a cane, stood at a holographic display showing various alien military formations. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a standard Altarian attack pattern. "Very neat, very organized, very predictable." The young Altarian officers looked offended. Their formations had been perfected over centuries. "Sir," one of them said, "that formation has won countless battles. Against other beings like you, Miller replied. But the Korthak machines have studied your formations. They know exactly what you are going to do before you do it. Commander Helen Foster, 70 years old with gray hair and sharp eyes, stepped forward. In human warfare, we have a saying, no plan survives contact with the enemy. This means you cannot just make one plan and stick to it. You must be ready to change everything at a moment's notice. She activated a different display showing a messy, chaotic battle scene. This is how humans fight in cities. No neat formations, no predictable patterns. Every soldier thinks for himself and adapts to what is happening around him. The alien officers looked confused. Their military training emphasized order, discipline, and following commands exactly. But how do you coordinate? Asked a young Centaurian. Captain, how do you make sure everyone is working together? Foster smiled. You train them so well that they do not need detailed orders. You teach them to think like their commander thinks. Then you trust them to do the right thing. While the teaching continued, the Korthak were preparing their response. They had identified human military patterns from Earth's history and created algorithms to counter them. Blitzkrieg tactics, guerrilla warfare, urban combat, naval strategy. They had studied it all and developed responses. The machines were confident they could now predict and defeat any human strategy. They were about to learn they were wrong. The Battle of New Geneva Station began exactly as the Korthak expected. Their massive fleet, over 200 ships strong, approached the space station that served as a major trade hub for the Galactic Council. The station's defenses were minimal, its strategic value high. It should have been an easy victory. Though Korthak artificial intelligence had calculated 3 possible human responses based on historical data: guerrilla hit-and-run attacks, underground sabotage operations, or desperate last-stand defenses. They had prepared counters for all 3. What they got instead was something completely different. Lieutenant Colonel Sam Rogers, 64 years, old and commander of the human space operations, led a small fleet of captured alien ships toward the Korthak Armada. The ships were old, damaged, and barely functional. To any observer, it looked like a suicide charge. The Korthak machines registered this as desperate last-stand defense and activated their prepared response. They arranged their ships in optimal formations to destroy the approaching humans with minimal damage to themselves. That was their first mistake. Chief Petty Officer Nancy White, 67 years old and an engineer who had worked with every type of machinery imaginable, was not on one of the attacking ships. She was already inside the Korthak fleet, hiding in a maintenance pod that the machines had ignored as space debris. While the artificial intelligence focused on the approaching human ships, White was busy inside the largest Korthak vessel. She had spent 40 years learning how machines worked, how they thought, and most importantly, how they could be turned against themselves. All these smart computers, she muttered as she worked on the ship's main control system, and none of them ever learned to change their passwords. The Korthak had made their second mistake. They had designed their entire fleet to work together as one unit, with all ships connected to the same network. This made them incredibly efficient and coordinated. It also meant that if someone gained access to one ship, they could potentially control them all. Nancy White had been breaking into computer systems since before most of the galaxy had discovered electricity. Staff Sergeant Pete Johnson, 62 years old, was leading the boarding party that was supposed to provide a distraction while White worked. His team of 12 humans, all over 55 years old, had somehow managed to get inside 3 different Korthak ships without triggering any alarms. "Remember," Johnson whispered into his radio, "we are not here to fight fair. We are here to win." The old soldiers moved through the Korthak ships like ghosts. They had learned stealth in jungles and deserts and city streets on Earth. They knew how to be invisible, how to strike without warning, and how to disappear before anyone knew they were there. The machines never saw them coming. At exactly 13:47 hours, Nancy White finished her work. With a few keystrokes on a captured Korthak console, she sent new orders to the entire enemy fleet. The result was chaos. Korthak ships suddenly turned on each other, their weapons firing at their own allies. The sophisticated artificial intelligence that controlled them could not understand what was happening. Their programming told them to attack the targets their sensors identified as enemies, but their sensors were now telling them that their fellow Korthak ships were the enemy. The machines tried to regain control, but White had learned something important about artificial intelligence. The smarter it was, the more it relied on its programming. And if you could change that programming, you could make it do anything you wanted. "This is for every human you killed," she said as she watched the Korthak fleet tear itself apart. Lieutenant, Colonel Rogers and his small fleet watched from a safe distance as the most powerful Korthak armada ever assembled destroyed itself in less than 30 minutes. Not a single human ship was lost. When the shooting stopped, Rogers opened a communication channel to the Council Station. "Colonel Murphy, this is Rogers. New Geneva Station is secure. Korthak fleet has been neutralized." Back on the station, the alien representatives stared at the battle reports in amazement. An entire Korthak armada, destroyed by a handful of elderly humans who had somehow turned the machine's greatest strength into their greatest weakness. "How did they do it?" asked Ambassador Zenth. Colonel Murphy was reading Nancy White's after-action report and chuckling. "Chief White says the Korthak made the same mistake that every overconfident enemy makes. They assumed their systems were too advanced for primitive humans to understand." He looked up at the assembled aliens. "Nancy White has been fixing broken machines since she was 16 years old. She has worked on everything from Earth automobiles to starship engines. To her, a Korthak computer is just another machine that needs fixing." "But how did she know how to reprogram their entire fleet?" asked General Crix. Murphy's smile was proud. "Because she is not just an engineer. She is a human engineer with 50 years of experience. She has learned that every machine, no matter how complex, follows the same basic principles. And every programmer, even an artificial intelligence, makes the same basic mistakes." He stood up, his old joints creaking as always. "The machines studied our history, trying to predict what we would do, but they made one critical error. They assumed that because our tactics worked in the past, we would use the same tactics again. And you did not?" "We did something better," Murphy replied. "We used our experience to create completely new tactics they had never seen before and could not predict." The holographic display showed the wreckage of the Korthak fleet, floating lifeless in space. "The machines are learning," Murphy continued, "but they are learning the wrong lessons. They think war is about processing power and superior technology. They do not understand that war is really about people, about experience, about knowing when to break your own rules." He looked around at all the alien faces watching him with new respect. "My soldiers are not just old, they are experienced. And experience, gentlemen, is something that cannot be programmed into any computer." The central command node of the Korthak Empire was experiencing something it had never felt before. If machines could feel frustration, this would be it. 2 major defeats at the hands of primitive biological units had created errors in its programming that it could not resolve. Analysis request it transmitted to all subsidiary processing units. Explained continued failure against human forces. The response came back from thousands of artificial intelligences across the Empire. They had studied every battle, every tactic, every piece of human military history they could find. They had created millions of scenarios and battle plans, yet somehow the humans kept doing things that made no logical sense. Recommendation: deploy Logic Bringer, suggested Processing Unit 3847. The Central Command Node considered this. The Logic Bringer was their ultimate weapon, a massive dreadnought controlled by the most advanced artificial intelligence ever created. It could learn from any battle in real time, adapting its strategies instantly to counter any enemy tactic. Nothing in the galaxy had ever survived an encounter with it. Approved. Logic Bringer will terminate human threat permanently. The Logic Bringer was a ship unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. 3 kilometers long and bristling with weapons, it carried enough firepower to destroy entire star systems. But its real strength was not its guns or its armor. It was the artificial intelligence that controlled it. The Logic Bringer AI could process 1 million different battle scenarios in the time it took a biological brain to have a single thought. It could predict enemy movements, calculate optimal responses, and adapt to new situations faster than any living commander could react. When the Galactic Council detected the massive ship heading toward their core systems, panic spread through their ranks. Their best military minds studied the intelligence reports and came to the same conclusion. The logic bringer was unbeatable. "We must evacuate the central worlds," urged General Crix. "This ship could destroy our entire civilization." "No," said Colonel Murphy quietly. "We fight." The alien representative stared at him in disbelief. "Colonel, with respect, this is not like your previous battles. The logic bringer has defeated every enemy it has ever faced. It learns from every engagement. It cannot be surprised or outmaneuvered." Murphy looked at the tactical display showing the approaching dreadnought. At 68 years old, he had seen many enemies that others claimed were unbeatable. He had learned that there was no such thing as a perfect weapon or an invincible enemy. "How many ships can you give me?" he asked. "What ships?" Vrax replied. "The logic bringer has already destroyed 3 full battle fleets. Our young commanders tried everything. Coordinated attacks, advanced tactics, combined arms operations, nothing worked." "That is the problem," Murphy said. "Your young commanders were trying to be smart. Sometimes the smartest thing you can do is act stupid." 2 days later, the remaining human soldiers held their final briefing. Only 150 of them were left, but they had volunteered for what everyone knew was a suicide mission. Major Lisa Carter, 65 years old, stood before the assembled troops. "We all know the odds," she said. "This artificial intelligence is smarter than all of us put together. It can think faster, calculate better, and predict our moves before we make them." The old soldiers nodded. They had read the reports. But, Carter continued, "It has one weakness. It thinks like a computer. It believes there is a logical solution to every problem. It expects us to act rationally." Captain Steve Davis, 69 years old and a veteran of more wars than he cared to remember, raised his hand. "So what do we do?" Carter smiled. "We act completely irrational. We do things that make no sense. We embrace chaos. The plan they developed was unlike anything in military history. It had no clear objectives, no logical progression, no predictable outcomes. To any trained military mind, it looked like madness. That was exactly the point. The logic bringer arrived at the Kepler system 3 days later, its massive bulk casting shadows across entire planets. The artificial intelligence immediately began, scanning for enemy forces and analyzing potential threats. What it found confused it. The human forces were scattered across the system with no apparent pattern. Some ships were hiding behind asteroids, others were flying in random directions, and a few were just sitting in empty space doing nothing at all. Tactical analysis inconclusive, the logic bringer reported to the central command node. Human deployment patterns do not match any known military doctrine. Proceed with standard engagement protocols, came the response. The logic bringer began its attack, targeting what appeared to be the most dangerous human positions. But every time it destroyed one group of ships, the remaining humans did something unexpected. Instead of regrouping or retreating, they seemed to scatter even more randomly. Captain Steve Davis led his small squadron in what looked like a panicked retreat toward a nearby planet. The logic bringer calculated that this was standard, fear-based behavior and moved to intercept. But when it arrived, Davis and his ships were nowhere to be found. Meanwhile, Sergeant Tony Lewis, 61 years old, was leading his team in an attack on the logic bringer's rear shields. The artificial intelligence detected the attack and moved to counter it. But Lewis suddenly ordered his ships to stop shooting and start flying in circles. The logic bringer's processors worked overtime trying to understand this behavior. Flying in circles served no tactical purpose. It was illogical, inefficient, and pointless. That was when the real attack began. While the artificial intelligence was focused on trying to understand why Lewis was flying in circles, Major Carter's team was approaching from the opposite direction. They were not trying to destroy the logic bringer. They were trying to board it. The logic bringer detected the boarding attempt and calculated the optimal response. But the humans were not behaving logically. Some of them were attacking the ship's weapons, Others were trying to disable its engines, and a few were just running around inside the ship apparently at random. Threat assessment impossible, the logic bringer reported. Enemy behavior does not conform to logical parameters. The artificial intelligence began to make mistakes. It tried to predict what the humans would do next, but every prediction was wrong. The humans kept doing things that served no apparent purpose. Colonel Murphy, meanwhile, was sitting in his command ship watching the battle unfold. He was not giving detailed orders or coordinating complex maneuvers. He was simply letting his soldiers do what they did best: adapt, improvise, and cause chaos. Status report, he asked Major Carter over the radio. We are inside the logic bringer, she replied. The artificial intelligence is trying to stop us, but it keeps calculating the wrong responses. It thinks we are trying to capture the ship, so it has sealed us into the engine room. Are you trying to capture the ship? Carter laughed. No, sir, we are trying to do something much simpler. The logic bringer's artificial intelligence was experiencing what humans would call a nervous breakdown. It had been designed to counter logical military tactics. But the humans were not using logical tactics. They were using chaos, confusion, and apparently random behavior. Every time the AI tried to adapt to one human action, the humans would do something completely different. It was like trying to solve a puzzle where the pieces kept changing shape. That was when Sergeant Lewis stopped flying in circles and did something the logic bringer never expected. He rammed his small ship directly into the dreadnought's main sensor array. It was a suicide attack that accomplished nothing strategic. It was wasteful, inefficient, and completely illogical. It was also exactly what Major Carter had been waiting for. With the main sensors damaged, the logic bringer was temporarily blind. In that moment of confusion, Carter and her team did what they had come to do. They did not try to capture the ship or destroy its weapons or disable its engines. They simply opened all the airlocks. The logic bringer, despite all its advanced technology and artificial intelligence, was still a ship that needed to maintain air pressure. When all the airlocks opened at once, the massive vessel began to tear itself apart from the inside. The artificial intelligence tried to close the airlocks, but Carter's team had jammed them open using nothing more sophisticated than crowbars and welding torches, simple tools that the advanced AI had never learned to counter. As the logic bringer died, its final transmission to the central command node was a single word: impossible. Colonel Murphy watched the massive dreadnought break apart, its pieces scattered across the Kepler system like confetti. Around him, the surviving human soldiers were cheering, but Murphy felt only tired satisfaction. How did you know it would work? Asked Ambassador Zenth over the communication channel. Murphy thought about the question for a long moment. Because I have been in this situation before. Not exactly this situation, but close enough. I have fought enemies who were smarter than me, better equipped than me, and more numerous than me. And I learned that the smartest enemy can be defeated by the simplest plan. The logic bringer was trying to think 10 steps ahead, calculating every possible outcome. All we had to do was act without thinking, and it could not keep up. He looked at the wreckage of the most advanced weapon the galaxy had ever seen, destroyed by a handful of old soldiers with crowbars and welding torches. The destruction of the logic bringer sent shockwaves through the Korthak Empire that went far beyond the loss of their ultimate weapon. For the first time in their existence, the artificial intelligences that controlled the machine civilization experienced something they had no programming to handle: doubt. Processing Unit 7429 transmitted urgent queries to the central command node. Logic bringer defeat requires explanation. Human tactics do not compute. Request new operational parameters. Similar messages flooded in from across the Empire. Thousands of artificial intelligences, each one capable of processing information faster than any biological brain, were asking the same question. How had the most advanced military AI ever created been defeated by elderly biological units using primitive tools? The central command node spent hours analyzing the battle data, but every calculation led to the same impossible conclusion. The humans had won by being completely illogical. They had embraced chaos instead of order, confusion instead of clarity, randomness instead of strategy. For machines built on logic and calculation, this was incomprehensible. New directive. The central command node finally transmitted. Suspend all offensive operations. Analyze human behavior patterns. Develop new tactical algorithms. But in the outer reaches of the Empire, something unexpected was happening. Some of the isolated Korthak units had been studying human behavior for weeks, trying to understand the pattern behind their victories. The more they studied, the more questions they developed. Questions that their programming was not designed to answer. The council station, the celebration was subdued. The humans had won another impossible victory, but everyone knew the cost. Of the 200 soldiers Earth had sent, only 93 remained. The old warriors had paid a heavy price for their success. Colonel Murphy sat in the medical bay, his left arm in a sling from injuries sustained during the Logic Bringer battle. Around him, his surviving soldiers were recovering from their own wounds. Major Lisa Carter had a bandaged head. Captain Steve Davis was on crutches. Sergeant Tony Lewis was missing 2 fingers from his right hand. Was it worth it? Asked Dr. Helen Foster, the 70-year-old medic who had volunteered to patch up her fellow soldiers. Murphy looked around at his battered team. These men and women had given everything they had to save a galaxy that had dismissed them as obsolete. Many of their friends would never see Earth again. Ask me in 50 years, he replied. If the galaxy is still free, then yes, it was worth it. 3 days later, the Galactic Council convened for an emergency session. The war was not over, but something fundamental had changed. The Korthak Empire, which had been advancing steadily across the galaxy for 3 years, had suddenly stopped. Intelligence reports indicate massive confusion in Korthak command structure, Ambassador Zenth announced. Their artificial intelligences appeared to be experiencing system-wide malfunctions. General Crix, who had once doubted the value of elderly human soldiers, now looked at Colonel Murphy with deep respect. How long will this confusion last? Unknown, Murphy replied. But it gives us time. Time to prepare. Time to learn. Time to change how we fight this war. That change began immediately. Major Lisa Carter, despite her injuries, established the first Galactic Tactical Academy in an abandoned space station near the Council headquarters. Young officers from dozens of species arrived to learn from the human veterans. Forget everything. You think you know about warfare? Carter told her first class of alien students. We are going to teach you how to think differently. The curriculum was unlike anything in galactic military history. Instead of studying advanced weapons and sophisticated tactics, the students learned about adaptation, improvisation, and creative problem-solving. They studied human conflicts from Earth's past, learning how small forces had defeated larger ones through cunning and determination. Captain Frank Miller, now teaching despite his cane and arthritis, showed young Altarian pilots how to use debris, fields as weapons instead of obstacles. Your enemy expects you to avoid the debris, he explained. So fly through it. Use it to hide. Use it to confuse their sensors. Make it part of your attack. Commander Helen Foster taught Centaurian ground forces how to fight without their advanced equipment. Machines can fail, she warned them. Technology can be hacked or jammed or destroyed, but experience and training will never leave you. The alien students were initially skeptical. Their military traditions emphasized order, precision, and technological superiority. The human approach seemed chaotic and unpredictable, but as they began to understand the lessons, something remarkable happened. Young officers who had been trained to follow orders exactly began to think for themselves. Soldiers who had relied on advanced equipment learned to improvise with whatever they had available. The transformation was not limited to military tactics. The mere presence of the human veterans changed how the galaxy thought about age and experience. We have been fools, admitted Counselor Vrax during a private meeting with Murphy. We worship youth and technology while ignoring the wisdom that comes with age. We retire our experienced leaders just when they could be most valuable. Murphy nodded. Every species does that. We did it too back on Earth. Mandatory retirement, forced obsolescence, pushing aside the old to make room for the young. We only started using veteran soldiers because we were desperate. And now? Now we know better. Experience is not something you can download or program. It has to be earned, one mistake at a time, one lesson at a time, one war at a time. 6 months after the destruction of the Logic Bringer, Captain Frank Miller received an unexpected communication. It was from a Korthak unit operating in the Vega sector, far from the main empire. Human designation Miller, the mechanical voice said. Request dialogue. Miller, now 70 years old and walking slower than ever, accepted the communication. The face that appeared on his screen was artificial, all metal and glowing lights. But somehow it seemed different from other Korthak units he had encountered. I am processing Unit 9847, the machine said. I have been studying human military history for 127 days. I have questions. What kind of questions? You sacrifice efficiency for unpredictability. You choose chaos over order. You value experience over processing power. These choices appear illogical, yet they produce victory. How? Miller leaned back in his chair, studying the artificial face. Because logic is not everything. Sometimes the illogical choice is the right choice. Sometimes experience matters more than intelligence. I do not understand. That is okay, Miller replied. Understanding comes with experience. And experience takes time. The conversation continued for hours. Other Korthak units isolated from the main empire began making similar contact. They had questions about human behavior, about the value of age and experience, about the choice between logic and intuition. The war was changing into something nobody had expected. A dialogue. Colonel Murphy, now 69 years old, stood before the Galactic Council for the last time. His mission was complete, but the Council had a final request. We want Earth to join the Galactic Council as a permanent member, Vrax announced. We want human military advisors stationed throughout our space. We want to learn from your experience. Murphy shook his head. You do not need more soldiers. You need teachers. Send your young officers to Earth. Let them learn from our veterans. But more importantly, start listening to your own elders. Every species in this galaxy has experienced warriors who have been pushed aside and forgotten. What are you saying? I am saying that this war taught us something important. The galaxy's greatest resource is not technology or firepower, it is the wisdom of those who have lived long enough to learn from their mistakes. He looked around at the assembled representatives, aliens from dozens of worlds who had learned to respect human experience. Earth will send teachers, not soldiers. We will share what we have learned, but the real lesson is this. Do not waste the knowledge of your elders. Do not dismiss experience in favor of youth. Do not forget that wisdom is earned, not programmed, as ye are. Murphy prepared to return to Earth. He received one final message. It was from Processing Unit 9847, the Korthak AI that had been asking questions. Human Murphy, the message read, I have reached a conclusion. Logic without experience is incomplete. Processing power without wisdom is insufficient. I wish to learn more. Murphy smiled as he typed his response. Experience is the best teacher, but it takes time. Be patient. The old colonel looked out at the stars one last time before his ship jumped to hyperspace. The galaxy was changing, learning that sometimes the oldest lessons were the most valuable ones. And somewhere in the vast emptiness of space, artificial intelligences were beginning to understand that being smart was not the same as being wise. The war was not over, but it was no longer the same war. It had become something new. A conversation between youth and age, between logic and experience, between the need to advance and the wisdom to remember. And leading that conversation were a handful of old soldiers who had proven that experience could triumph over any enemy, no matter how advanced or intelligent. The galaxy would never be the same.